Artificial Intelligence, a Fan's Novel. Book 1, Chapter 7, Alone. Martin had been home precisely 1 month. He had missed 5 birthdays during the time he had been frozen. 5 years of his short life had simply vanished, and he'd not grown an inch in his cryogenic state. Dr. Fraser said that he would experience quick and perhaps painful growth spurts over the next few months. But for now, he was still very much the boy that had been put under the gas so long ago, when his life functions had dropped so low that it was the only way to keep from losing him altogether. Monica and Henry were now planning to throw Martin a long overdue birthday party. They had actually decided to do it the day after he awoke, but they knew he would not be well enough for some time. So they rescheduled their festivities for the time when the boy would be able to leave the bed and then the house. They had kept this plan a secret. Initially, Monica had thought that David could be trusted with the information, but why risk it, she thought. He would be no assistance in the planning anyway, so he was kept out of the loop. Henry had called the families of Martin's friends and shared the good news of their boy's return. He had suffered 5 years of coma and weeks of isolation while he grew strong enough to walk and play. Now they wanted to try and help him back onto the path from which he'd been detoured, to surprise him by bringing over friends he hadn't seen in years. The events of the prior night cast a gloom on their festive plans, but they had no intention of canceling. Monica's eye had not been damaged, but the brow had a small cut that had bled sufficiently to put a scare into them both. Henry had been so angry that he wanted to return the mecha right then and there, but Monica had kept him in the bathroom until he calmed down. "Don't let this ruin Martin's birthday," she had told him. She didn't know how she felt about it yet, but she was grateful that the wound hadn't been grave. She was not only grateful for herself, but there would have been no way to keep Henry from returning the mecha, or, in his anger, perhaps something worse. She wasn't easy with the way he had shaken David, and the way he'd glowered at David's pathetic keening. She hadn't seen the man she loved in those cold eyes. That morning, Monica had snuck David away from the bedroom while Martin was still sleeping and gave him her own special mission. The mecha had been overly apologetic and so eager to please her that it had broken her heart. So she gave him an important task. She took some boxes out of the closet and told David that these were for his big brother's birthday, which they were going to celebrate today. His job was to put the toys together. She had taken him down to the basement and shown him how to wrap presents. As usual, David had mastered this after watching her do it just once. Monica had also given him a special toy. It was the newest thing from Cybertronics. Henry had brought it home from work. In a couple of months, every kid in the area would have one, but Martin and most of Henry's co-workers' children would get theirs first. "This is a smart ranger, David," Mommy said. "This is going to be your present to Martin. I want you guys to be real brothers, but no more sneaking around at night." David had promised he would never do that again. "What made you do that?" she asked him. David's eyebrows pinched at some inner conflict. Martin had tricked him, yes, but he had known that he should not have gone into the room. In the end, it was his decision. "I wanted a lock of your hair, like in the movie," he replied. Monica eyed David carefully. He was getting more sophisticated, wasn't he? He was learning how to fib. She decided to change the subject and asked if David understood the Smart Soldier's instruction pamphlet. He'd shown her how easy it was for him by whizzing through the form quickly. Then he went to work putting the present together and wrapping it in a box. Monica knew that Martin had something to do with what had happened the night before. She could have forced David to tell her what his role had been, but she decided to let it go. Maybe this would be some new bond between them, their little secret, so to speak. She hadn't been hurt, just scared. It wasn't too late to start over again, to give it another try. But when she confronted Henry, she found a second chance wasn't going to be an easy sell. Mom had told Martin to stay in his bedroom while they took care of some things. He'd thought he was in for big trouble, but the trouble never came. He was relieved. The Mecha had apparently not said anything. Then Martin had overheard his parents arguing about David. Dad wanted to return it to Cybertronics immediately, but Mom said that was absolutely out of the question, that she would not allow them to destroy David. She said that he was part of the family, and they weren't going to kill him just because he was having problems dealing with his new human feelings. Dad had said that kill was an inappropriate word, but Mom inquired as to what other word was appropriate for taking someone's life. Martin had been curious just what feelings Mom had been talking about. Did David have real feelings, like people did? Like he did? He was listening raptly, but Dad had closed the bedroom door. Undeterred, Martin leaned on the wall and pressed his ear tightly against it. Though somewhat muffled, he could hear every word his parents spoke this way. He learned something about David then, something that he'd not known. The information was something that he had always suspected, but hearing it was still a shock to him. David had not really been meant for him at all. It wasn't a toy. It was an imitation son. Dad said that the imprinting was a new procedure, and there could be flaws that the people of Cybertronics didn't know about. So that was it. Now Martin understood everything. David was some new project that Dad had brought home to test for the guys at his job. Martin suddenly felt like a selfish and errant child. He had almost ruined his dad's test, and in the process could have hurt his mother. He had a sudden impulse to apologize to David. Imagine saying you're sorry to a mecha. But David was not around. He was doing something for Mom down in the basement. Maybe later, he thought. Maybe. He put his ear to the wall again, but Mom and Dad had gone downstairs and out by the pool, where he couldn't hear them talk. "It's normal for little boys to feel competitive and jealous," Monica said, as she was placing plastic utensils on the tables around the pool. Henry followed her, annoying her. "Martin's only been home a month. It's normal for brothers to challenge each other," she insisted. Henry placed a few shoots of balloons on the ground around the tables. He was getting tired of her rationalizations and wondered just who she was trying to convince. He was playing a game. He made a mistake, and... Monica paused. "He's practically human," she said. "That's not how he looked holding the knife," Henry replied. "Scissors," Monica corrected him. "It was a weapon," Henry countered. Here we go again, Monica thought. One of the most basic protocols for mecha was that they couldn't harm their human owners. It was programmed. Any mecha that intentionally harmed a human was automatically destroyed. Was this Henry's new strategy? To claim that David had tried to hurt her and have him shut down? She fixed Henry with an impatient glare. She was getting angry now. "Why do you keep imagining that he was purposely trying to harm me?" she said. "Because we don't know the answer to that," Henry challenged. He put the balloons down and confronted his wife. "How is it worth the risk to you or Martin, or to us as a family, to have that thing around if it's dangerous?" "I will not let you take him back," she roared. "You told me what they would do if you took him back." Her anger silenced Henry. She walked away to finish the decorations. Henry was quiet for a time, searching for the right words. When he found them, he continued cautiously. "Think about this, Monica," he said. "David is a prototype, The first and, so far, the only of his kind actually functioning. He was created to love, Monica. To love. That is an entirely new thing for a mecha to deal with. If he was created to love, then it's reasonable to assume he also knows how to hate. And if pushed to those extremes, what is he really capable of? In spite of her anger, Monica found herself listening to Henry's reasoning. She thought about the night before. What had she seen then? It was just a little innocent boy trying to compete for his mother's love, right? What else could it have been? She narrowed her eyes on Henry. He was manipulating the situation to get his way. That was all. Without a word, she pressed the box of party utensils against his chest and let them go. Henry caught them before they dropped and watched her storm into the house. Monica had things to do. There was a party to prepare for. David should be finished wrapping the presents by now. She had to get him prepared too. The guests had to be told that David was not to be discussed outside of the house. But this should be no issue, for they were all Cybertronics employees or old friends who could be trusted. Then she heard the hearty laughter of young boys coming from the front of the house. Damn it, the guests were already arriving. "Martin!" she yelled. Martin was perplexed by the sight of the large boys who smiled up at him as he made his way down the stairs. When Mom had called his name, he had expected that some sort of punishment was finally being exercised. But, wait, who was that? Oh my God, that was Todd. What was going on here? "Hey, dork, get on down here," the bigger version of his friend yelled. Jock and Philip were there too. And who was that other kid with him? Sheesh, that was Gautam. He had been smaller than Martin before, and now he was... Martin was in shock. For the first time since he'd been awake, the weight of his lengthy hibernation came down upon him. But it was soon lifted as his friends teased and funned with him. There was so much catching up he had to do. New bands, new fads, and girls. And what was this they'd been told about a little brother? Other guests soon arrived. A small group of cousins, aunts, and uncles, followed by Grandma Swinton, who came all the way from Little California and planted a big wet kiss on Martin's cheek. The guys all snickered at this, and Martin made a return gesture when none of the adults were looking. There were a lot of people from Dad's work, and they were all interested in seeing the mecha. But Dad seemed annoyed by the idea and waved the thought away, saying it would be around later, that they should all go out to the party area by the pool and relax, enjoy themselves. In the basement, David had finally finished wrapping the presents. Mommy came down to see him. "What a beautiful job, honey," she said, genuinely pleased. She sat him down and then looked at him seriously. "David, you have to be," she wanted to say careful, "good around Henry from now on. You can't do anything like what you did last night, ever again. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mommy," David said meekly, his hands held tight in his lap. He was the picture of a little boy's innocent regret. Monica studied his face. His eyes were different in some way. Was it his competition with Martin that was changing him? Or was there something else? She pinched his nose and he smiled. Then she handed him a colorful pair of swimming trunks. She'd bought them when she had been shopping for Martin's presents. She knew from reading the manual that David couldn't go swimming, that he'd sink right to the bottom, but she had figured that he might as well fit in as much as possible. "David, these are for you," she said, and then helped him out of his clothing and into his new colorful swimwear. "Some of Martin's friends are here today," she said. "You should try to get to know them. Try to play around with them and learn from them." But even as she said this, she knew that David was never going to change from the emotionally vulnerable boy that he had been programmed to be. He was smart, though. He'd find a way to fit in. She was sure of it. Monica gazed at David for a time, her little robot boy, Her life was so much better since she'd awakened his love. She had so much to thank him for. But now she had to attend to the guest upstairs. She ruffled David's hair and kissed him gently on his forehead. It was the last kiss Monica would give David in her life. "Happy birthday, Martin," David said cheerfully. He knelt by the poolside where Martin sat looking forlorn, watching his friends splashing around in the water. David had brought Martin the Smart Ranger in the box he had wrapped like Mommy had told him. "I made this for you," he said, hoping that Martin would try to be nice today. Martin had been feeling distant and left out. His friends, now grown beyond him, played freely in the pool. Their healthy bodies and inexhaustible energy made him envious. He wasn't even allowed to swim yet. His body wasn't strong enough. He turned and gazed at the mecha when it addressed him. He wanted to be mad at the thing, but it really wasn't the mecha's fault that his mom had feelings for it. It was just a robot. A toy, really. It was just doing what it was programmed to do. The thing didn't even really seem to understand the differences between them. Martin smiled weakly at David. It might not be so bad having a little brother. Hell, he might even get along with it someday. At least he could try, if only for Mom's sake. "So is that him? Is that your little brother?" someone called out. Martin looked over to see Todd swimming frantically from the volleyball game, which was now rapidly dispersing as the kids came to see Martin's new toy sibling. "Well, technically no," Martin replied dismissively. Todd crawled from the pool and appraised David excitedly. David appraised Todd in return. This boy was bigger than he and Martin both. His stomach was puffed out, and his voice was more like a man's voice, like Henry's. His face was red from exertion, and he splashed water all over David and Martin as he struggled his way out of the pool. "You're Mecha," Todd said. "I'm David," David replied. Todd laughed. "No, I mean we're organic," he said, pointing a finger at his own chest. Then he pointed at David. "And you're mechanical. Get it? Orga Mecha, Orga Mecha, Orga Mecha." The big boy started walking around David as he repeated this chant. The other boys were swimming over now and getting out of the pool. Soon David was drenched with water as he became the center of their attention. Martin reached out and grabbed Todd by the hand. "Stop it, Todd," he commanded. Mom had told him not to let his friends make an issue of David's differences in front of him, but Todd was unstoppable. The guy hadn't changed that much after all. "I didn't even know they made little kids," Todd said as he continued his inspection of David. Philip had come out of the pool too and stood there soaking wet, eyeing David with anxious curiosity. "Can you pee?" he inquired. David knew pee. It was waste disposal. But David produced no waste to dispose of. "I cannot," he responded. "Then let's see what you can't pee with," Philip said, reaching for David's swimming trunks. Martin slapped Philip's hand away. "Cut it out. What are you, a perv or something?" he said. David looked curiously at Martin when he did this. Martin glared back at the mecha, wondering why in the hell it wasn't defending itself. "It's just a doll, man. What's the big deal?" Philip countered. Todd reached out and touched David on the shoulder. "Feel it, man. It's creepy," he said, running his hand over the robot's smooth skin. David did not understand the boy's actions, but he was not being hurt, and so he did not object. The other boys quickly joined in, gathering around David, pressing and pinching and squeezing his skin. They oohed and ahed at the real feeling of David's skin and hair. Martin did not know why this annoyed him. He'd done the same thing a couple of weeks ago. But some strange bond had suddenly occurred between him and the robot. He didn't mind this so much, but if the boys got out of hand, he'd put it to a stop. David suddenly understood what they were doing. They were having fun with him. Wasn't this tickling? David knew tickle and made the appropriate response. The boys all jumped back when the mecha erupted into strange laughter. It was a better simulation than when he had first arrived, but it still sounded odd and mechanical to Orga ears. Across the pool, some of the adults had become curious about what all the kids were so fascinated with. A few of them decided to find out what it was. The boys were still watching David, though skeptically now. Some of them laughed and walked away. "What a dork," one of them said. Todd just rolled his eyes. "That sounds so phony," he said. Martin was slightly embarrassed for David, but he was happy that the big deal was starting to subside. He was even happier when David finally stopped that weird-sounding laughter. Too bad there was no program for how to chill out. Todd wasn't finished with his inspection. He knelt in front of David and started running his hands up and down the robot's inner arm. It was so real. There were even veins in there. "Does he have DOS?" the boy said. "What's that?" Martin replied, not really wanting to know. He just wished they'd leave the poor thing alone, and couldn't help it if it was stupid. "Damage avoidance system," Todd responded, as if everybody should know. "It's a pain alert system, like so they don't go picking up fire with their bare hands and stuff. Our serving man has it." And he knew that very well. He'd had plenty of fun making the thing go into alert mode when Mom and Dad weren't around. It was hilarious to watch the elderly-looking sim running frantically away from a little pinprick in the ass, or something equally as harmless. Todd rose and looked around. There was a table nearby with the remains of the cake on it. Ah, there's what he was looking for. He grabbed David by the wrist and led him to the table. The other boys crowded around closely as the adults slowly began to gather on the outskirts of their circle. Todd was always good for a laugh. Martin sighed and bowed out. If the dumb machine didn't have enough common sense to protect itself, then he wasn't going to get involved. Todd picked up a large cake ladle and turned to David. "Listen, I'm not going to cut you. This is not going to hurt," he said, holding up the ladle for David to see. Then he pressed the blade against the soft flesh of David's inner arm. "This will not cut your skin," he said. "Just tell me when you feel it." Todd knew that he didn't have to actually cut the skin to initiate the program. It was different in each model. He wondered what this one would do. He pushed the blade down slowly. David didn't understand what the big boy wanted. He was trying to be friendly and fun, so he would let them play. He felt the blade being pressed into his arm. He felt it pressing harder as the big boy watched him curiously. Then David felt the warning feeling that meant he should pull his arm away, but the big boy wouldn't let go. He pressed the blade harder against David's soft inner arm. What was the boy trying to... A sudden mad rush of information ran up David's arm and exploded into his head. "Initiate safety alert!" The message flashed inside David's brain. A bolt of life-preserving energy came with it. "Safety alert! Pursue safety!" David's head jerked up. His eyes opened wide. The sensitive light apertures opened to maximum for brightness and clarity. "Safety alert! Run!" His brain told him to seek out something, someone, anything familiar. "Keep me safe! Keep me safe! Keep me safe! Keep me safe!" David began to chant as he looked around the crowd for a familiar face. His legs were bent to run, his outer features that of a terrified child. This was supposed to alert the adults in the vicinity that something was wrong, but the adults could not see him within the press of fascinated boys. Martin heard David suddenly make a strange whining sound. What were they doing to him now? He heard the mecha boy chanting something low under his breath. "Keep me safe, keep me safe, keep me safe, keep me safe." The other boys were backing away now. Uh-oh, Todd had screwed up this time. But Todd was mindless of the trouble he'd initiated. He watched, fascinated, as the little mecha looked around frantically, its head making swift robotic jerks. This was way cooler than the serving man back home. Images of safe people quickly flashed before David's inner eye. He saw Mommy, he saw Henry, and then he saw... Martin saw David's eyes lock on him. "Hey, what'd you guys do?" he said. Then David quickly sprinted towards Martin and hid behind his back, grasping him around the waist, pinning his arms at his sides, and stepping away from the threat, away from the big boy with the danger in his hands. "Keep me safe, Martin! Keep me safe, Martin!" David repeated over and over. His litany was a blur of excited whispers into Martin's ear as he attempted to move to a safe proximity from the dangerous boy. A few of the adults now saw what was happening as David and Martin stepped backwards out of the throng of curious boys, but they did not know the nature of the situation and thought it was a game. Martin struggled against the mecha's grasp. Its arms were too strong. "Let me go! Let me go!" he yelled. What the hell was this damn thing doing? "Mom! Mom!" The robot was holding him tightly, backing them away from Todd and the other boys, but it was backing them towards the... Martin suddenly felt a loss of balance and the sky rotated. "Mom!" he yelled as he disappeared under the water, gripped tightly by the safety alarming robot. His mouth filled with water, his nose filled too. He could not breathe. Monica was speaking with Grandma Swinton when she heard Martin calling for her. She looked around, just in time to see Martin jump into the water with another boy. He wasn't supposed to go into the water yet. What was he doing? "Martin!" she called out. She ran to the pool and through the water saw Martin with another boy. Who was that? "Oh my God!" she yelled. "Henry! Henry!" David was falling down into the cold blue. The filtered glow of the sun and the warbling silhouettes of the people standing around the pool receded quickly above them. David's fiber metallic infrastructure and flesh-simulating silicon exterior did not have the buoyancy of a real boy's body, so they plummeted straight to the bottom. "Keep me safe, Martin. Keep me safe, Martin. Keep me safe." Martin could hear David's muffled chant through his own terror. Henry was standing with one of his fellows from Cybertronics. There was a commotion happening at the poolside. What now, he wondered. Then he saw Monica's terrified face and the group of boys pointing into the water. Where was Martin? Where was his little boy? Henry rushed for the pool, his friends following quickly on his heels. He ripped off his shirt and dove into the water. David felt safe now. The dangerous boy was up at the poolside and had not followed them into the water. Some other boys had jumped in, but had stayed near the surface, their excited voices raised and calling for help. Then he saw the men come into the water. The mecha was strong. Henry and the other men attempted first to lift the boys out together, but their combined weight and the robot's lack of buoyancy made that too difficult. Life-saving seconds were passing. They tore at the robot's arms. They punched at its face. They fought and struggled with it until it finally let Martin go. The boy was not moving. No air escaped his mouth. They pushed off the bottom and flew to safety. David watched as the men rushed out of the water with Martin. One of them had hit him in the face. He'd realized then that they wanted Martin and had let him go. David could still hear them with his special ears. They were excited. Someone was calling out Martin's name over and over. He realized that it was Mommy's voice. She said, "Breathe, breathe." Then she made the crying sound. He saw them quickly stand as one and walk away as if they carried something together. Were they going to come for him too? David waited and waited. The water had calmed now. He was engulfed and embraced by it. There was no weight here, no inertia that his limbs need to accommodate, no hurt or confusion. He felt he could stay here for a long time. It was peaceful. His mind seemed to work better in this quiet place. Gradually, a thought that had been forming in his head took shape. It was pressed into form out of the tumultuous cluster of emotions that had befallen him ever since Martin's arrival. It had something to do with the fairy tale Mommy had told him. He felt a sudden urgent need to explain this to her, but still no one had come for him. Something had gone wrong, but he did not know exactly what. He reached his arms out, up towards the distant sky that danced softly above him. His fingers extended outward, grasping at the vision that would burn forever in his brain. "Mommy," he whispered into the cold blue. Teddy watched the adults pushing on Martin's chest. There was much urgency and alarm in the air. Daddy put his mouth against Martin's, but Teddy knew this was not a kiss. He did not want to get in anyone's way, so he moved away from the commotion. Then he saw the adults rise as one, with Martin's still form, and rush into the house. This was bad, very bad. When they were gone, Teddy walked to the poolside. He gazed into the water. David was in there. He was reaching up, reaching for something. Teddy could see the look on David's face. His mouth was moving, as if he was calling out to someone. Teddy was not a sophisticated robot. He played, he alerted, he protected. But in that instant he realized that David was not a toy, that there was no place for David in his index. He stood by helplessly until Henry and some other men came to take David out of the water. David was in his room where Henry had left him. The man had seemed angry, but he'd been nice when he gave David the bathrobe and taken the wet swimming trunks. He had told him to stay here until they came for him. David had taken this opportunity to draw some words. In the water he had finally understood something new that he had not known how to express. The words, he hoped, would express this thought that had come from his new mind. He drew the letters slowly, letting his new feelings take their own shape in the words he created. David had just finished his last note when he heard Mommy come into the room. He put down the crayon that he had been writing with and rushed excitedly to see her. "Mommy!" he cried as he reached to embrace her. Monica caught David by the shoulders. She couldn't hug him. She could no longer deny Henry's observations. Martin had been taken to the hospital. He would be okay, thank God he would be okay. But his lungs were too soon out of stasis to handle the flood of water to which they'd been exposed, and he had to be placed under observation until they were sure he'd be all right. He'd live, they assured her. He'd be home the next day. But everything else had changed. Monica held the excited Mecca at bay. "I need to speak with you for a minute, okay?" she said. "Okay," David said. He ran obediently to his bed. Monica looked over her shoulder. Henry was there, waiting by the door. His face was set and determined. "Get this over with, Monica," is what his look said. She turned away from him. That look was accusatory, and she felt guilty enough already. Had she missed this all along, this conflict that had been growing between Martin and the Mecca? She'd never had a chance to talk to Martin's friends about the incident by the pool. She never heard about Todd's abuse of David. In the excitement, this critical piece of information had been overlooked, forgotten. Monica walked to the bedside, but she couldn't sit down. There was no turning back now. David was either malfunctioning or the imprinting was causing some unprecedented reaction in his brain. "David," she started. But then she realized David was not looking at her. He was smiling, looking at the desk near the window. She followed the Mecca's gaze and saw there a small, neatly stacked pile of sketch paper. The first one had something written on it. It was in red crayon and written in precise lettering. She looked at David. He was smiling up at her now, his face gleaming with the expectant look she'd seen 1,000 times since she had awoken his love. He had something to show her. Monica walked over to the tidy stack of papers and picked them up. She began to flip through them. "Mommy, how are you today? I am fine, and I love you. Teddy is helping me write to you." Her heart dropped. What kind of machine wrote these things? "I love you, and Henry and Martin, and Teddy too, and the sun is shining." By what process did this machine realize these feelings? From whence did they come? I am our real son, but not Teddy. I hate Teddy. He's not real like you, David. I am our real son, and Martin too, but not Teddy. Monica felt her tears build. She could read no more. She had a job to do, and she had to do it now. She put the papers back down and wiped her eyes dry. "These are beautiful, David," she said weakly, not looking at him. She couldn't look into that innocent gaze, not just yet. She calmed herself. "Thank you," she said, when her voice was in better control. She walked to the mecha boy and sat down next to him. She looked down at his smooth, innocent face and then quickly looked away. It was a simulation. A simulation. Henry was still waiting by the door. Beyond that door were responsibilities, her family, her son's future, her life. "David," she started slowly, "I was thinking we could go for a drive tomorrow, out in the country, just you and me. What do you think?" "And Teddy?" David said excitedly. "Sure, Teddy," Monica agreed. She couldn't look at him. She knew he was beaming with childish joy. Then she felt the little boy's arms wrap around her. He was warm. Was he alive? Dear God, he can't be alive. She steeled herself against the feeling of his little embrace, this tender, loving grasp that had once saved her heart. "Thank you, Mommy," David whispered in childish reverence, his tender face pressed against her bosom. In this secret place in his brain, her image burned with a radiance like never before. "Thank you so much," he said. Monica heard the words and pulled her heart back from them. She sat quietly for a time and let her boy enjoy this last tender moment between them. Soon enough his troubled brain would be silent. He would be beyond the pain and confusion with which this awful process, this imprinting, had cursed them both. She gazed out through the window as he gripped her tightly. Time passed. The night was falling. The last rays of light glowed weakly against the insistence of the looming darkness above. Her betrayal had begun. David could see sky rolling quickly by, in between the overhanging branches of the trees. He was curious and expectant, wondering when they would stop. Teddy was sitting in his lap, and the old machinery in the super toy's neck whirred and clicked as he watched the landscape scroll by. Mommy had been strangely silent. David gazed at her, not believing he was here alone with her, hoping this would last forever. "Where are we going?" he said, conversationally. Mommy continued to drive silently. Some more of the road passed by. "Someplace nice?" he said, when she did not respond. Monica wished he'd be quiet. Cybertronics was still a few kilometers away, and she was bracing herself for that moment of truth, that last moment when they would lead him away. Would he cry her name? Would they have to struggle with him as she left, leaving him to his doom? Mommy's face was tight, and her lips pressed closed. There was no expression for him to read, but David saw something in her eyes. "Are those happy tears?" he said. Monica wondered what she would see in their eyes, those technicians who would put her soft-hearted metal son to sleep forever. David was just a machine to them, right? Would they smile apologetically as they fought to tear him away from her, as he struggled against their grasping hands? Would he know? Dear God, would he know what was happening? Please don't let him understand. Mommy was still not responding. Had he annoyed her, like Teddy said he did sometimes? Maybe he should change the subject. "What's for dinner tonight?" he said, hopeful that this would break her silence. Monica knew there was no turning back. She pushed her chin up and drove faster. "You know that you don't eat," she said, finally, punctuating each word. David was glad to hear her voice, but there was reservation there. "Yes," he replied, "but I do like sitting at the table." Then suddenly they were there. End of line. Quickly and unceremoniously the Cybertronic statue rolled into view, its outstretched arms pronouncing this place a point of no return. Beyond that point, nothing could ever be undone. All transactions were final. David saw the statue, and something struck him familiar. He knew that shape. Mommy must have recognized it too, because she slowed down and then stopped. He heard her make a sad sound, and the statue was forgotten as he eyed her curiously. Why was she sad? Had he made her sad, somehow? Monica could not go there. Her foot would not press the accelerator. What were they expecting her to do? Kill her son? Is that what they thought she was going to do? David was pressed back into his seat as Mommy suddenly accelerated and sped past the statue. She raced along the road, her face displaying some conflict unrecognizable to him. He tried to ask her what was wrong, but she told him to just be quiet. She had to think. Monica didn't know how many kilometers had passed or how long she had driven since seeing the Cybertronics access road. Around them, the lush forest pressed in against the road. She needed space. She needed time. She needed to think. Damn it, she just needed some time. Then, to the right of her, a path came into view. She stared at it through tear-streaked vision. Yes, she realized, that was the only way. Her decision made, she turned quickly down the forest road and retreated into the shadows. When Mommy stopped under the thick lining of trees, David grabbed Teddy and the blanket and jumped out excitedly. He would find a place for them to sit, where he could watch Mommy eat. He ran a short distance until he found a clear spot and placed Teddy against a fallen log. Then he happily unraveled the big blanket that they would use to sit on. Teddy scanned their surroundings. He knew this was not a good place to sit and eat. It was dark and damp, and the ground was mossy. Something was wrong. Monica hurried after David. She had to explain things to him now. Please, she thought, let him understand. She could see him through the trees ahead, an unsuspecting metal boy in the shadows of the forest. She watched him trying to unfold the large blanket, struggling with it as a quick breeze arose and blew it over his head. This was the only way. She knew that. She could not take him to his death, and she could not take him back to the only home he had ever known. She forced herself forward. "David," she said softly as she walked towards him. He was still struggling with the blanket, still not comprehending anything. "Hold on, David," she said, and pulled the blanket from over his head. She tossed it to the ground. Not understanding the gesture, David went to his knees to smooth the blanket so she could sit. "David, listen," she commanded as she knelt beside him. He looked up at her. His smiling face betrayed only the slightest confusion at her desperate tone. In this look, she could see that he loved her so. Wasn't there some programming command that would just make him walk away? Some string of words that could magically turn off this maddening love? And what then about her heart? She spoke softly. "Listen, you won't understand the reasons, but I have to leave you here." David gazed at her quietly for a time, his eyebrows pinched in the simulation of childish puzzlement. She could imagine the processor in his head working. "Is it a game?" he said, with a smiling realization. She fought tears. "No," she said, flatly, winning the fight. David did not understand this. Mommy was going to leave him? Here? Why? Some urgency was beginning in the back of his new mind. "When will you come back for me?" he said, hesitantly. the urgency getting closer to the surface. Monica steeled herself. She had to be strong. "No, I'm not coming back, David. You have to be here by yourself." There, she said it. That was it. Please let that be it. "Alone?" he said in a quavering voice. She could see that he understood, but it was far from over. "With Teddy," she whispered. "Please let that be enough, David," she thought. "That's all I have to offer you." She didn't know what was happening behind those puzzled eyes. She only knew that her own heart had already been broken. David considered Mommy's words. He was going to be alone. Alone! The urgency finally arrived and spilled out of him. "No, no, please, Mommy, no," he whined, his voice raised in that childish keening that was impossible to refuse. I'll be good, he said, reaching for her, but she pushed his hands away. "David, you have to understand. They're going to destroy you. Destroy you!" He had to understand. Please let him understand. But David's keening increased, and he grabbed at Monica as she rose to flee from him. She couldn't do this. She hadn't asked for this. She couldn't love him anymore. "I have to go now," she yelled, her voice breaking with emotion. "Mommy! Mommy!" he called, chasing her as she fled back to the car. "Don't call me that," she thought. Tears flooded her vision, and her legs went weak. David caught her, and she could see that his eyes were moist. Was it crying? Why would they program something like that? David grabbed at her wrist, his eyes wide with fright. The thing he had wanted to tell her came out of him then, the thing he had thought about in the pool. "Mommy, if Pinocchio became a real boy, then I can become a real boy too, and then I can come home." Monica was aghast. This was the worst piece of savagery yet. The fairy tale. He had taken the fairy tale to heart. "It's just a story, David," she yelled, pulling herself free. "But a story tells what happens," David said. Couldn't she see that? Monica had to get away. "Stories aren't real," she screamed. Then she ran quickly for the vehicle. David pursued her, insisting loudly that indeed stories were real. Yes, Mommy, he knew they were real. He caught her at the car, but only because something had dawned on her. She stopped and faced him, yanking her arm free as he desperately grabbed at her again. Her weakness would do neither of them any good. "Listen to me," she commanded, reaching into the pocket of her vest. She pulled out a stack of wadded nubucks and forced them into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Take this, and don't let anybody know how much you have," she said. She pointed in the direction of the Cyberdronics building. "Don't go that way," she screamed. "Don't ever go that way, or they will catch you. Don't ever let them catch you, or they'll—" She couldn't finish that. Her tears threatened to consume her again, but she fought them down. "Stay away from flesh fairs, David. Stay away from groups of people. Stay away from all people. Stay only with others like you, David. Only Mecca are safe." She was finished now. She looked away before his eyes bore into her soul. But he grabbed her around the neck before she could rise. "I'm sorry I broke myself, Mommy. If you let me, I'll be so real for you. So real," he cried over and over. If she would just let him try, he could. He knew he could. Monica couldn't do this. "Let me go!" she roared, and threw him to the ground. He lay there, shocked, staring at her. The impact must have caused some override of his panic. Or maybe he had just finally realized that it was ending, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Monica saw the look on his face after she had thrown him off. She almost ran to see if he was okay, but the look stopped her. In its way, it was worse than the pleading. His eyes had gone blank, empty at the realization that there was no mercy she would allow him. Was this the last look of the condemned before the final stroke? She turned and fled, her heart ragged and choking in her throat. When she reached the car, she stopped and looked at him one last time. "I'm sorry, David," she cried. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the world." And then she was inside the car. fleeing that world which she'd neglected to explain, locking the doors and pressing on the accelerator, ignoring the sound of small hands beating against the window, ignoring the heartbreaking cries that were muffled by the clatter of branches and brush hitting the side of the car. Ignore the mirror, too, her heart told her. Don't look back, don't look back. But she did look into the mirror, and that last image would stay with her for the rest of her life. Refusing to go away, it would burn a place in her mind and slowly burrow its way into her soul. She saw the helpless silhouette fade into the gloom of the forest, the little imitation boy whose real love had saved her ability to feel, to love. Now he stood alone. His head fell to one side in uncomprehending resignation as she watched. She sped away, faster and faster, sped away from the pain, from the shame, from the guilt that she would never be able to escape. Her betrayal was complete, but it would never be over.